The Wedding That Never Happened, Nigeria, Lagos. Chapter 1, The Perfect Day That Wasn't. Lara stood in front of the mirror in the bridal suite of a five-star hotel in Victoria Island, Lagos. Her white gown hugged her curves perfectly, and her makeup was flawless, a soft glow enhancing her caramel skin. Her heart pounded, excitement and nerves swirling in her chest. Today was the day she had dreamed of, her wedding day. Outside, guests were arriving at the extravagant hall, decorated with white roses and gold chandeliers. The air buzzed with anticipation. The hashtag LaraAnTade 2025 was already trending on Instagram. Tade, her fiancé, was everything a woman could ask for: handsome, wealthy, and a successful tech entrepreneur. Their love story had been a fairy tale, a whirlwind romance that had captivated social media. But fairy tales often hid dark secrets. As Lara glanced at her phone, a text message popped up from an unknown number. "Don't marry him. He's lying to you." Her hands trembled. Who would send this? Was it a jealous ex? A prankster? Or was there something she didn't know? She hesitated for a moment, then shook off the doubt. It was just cold feet, she told herself. She was marrying the man she loved. Chapter 2, The Supermarket Revelation. 30 minutes before the wedding, she realized she needed a few personal items. She stepped out of the hotel lobby, her maid of honor distracted by last-minute preparations, and walked to the mini supermarket down the street. The cool air of the store greeted her as she walked in, still in her bridal robe. The aisle was almost empty, except for a man standing near the drinks section. She reached for a bottle of water when she heard a familiar voice. "Lara?" She froze. She knew that voice, deep, rich, unforgettable. Turning slowly, she found herself staring into the eyes of Dayo, her ex-boyfriend. The one who had broken her heart 4 years ago. Chapter 3, The Past Never Dies. Dayo had been her first real love, the one who had made her believe in fairy tales before shattering her heart. They had met in NYSC camp, and their love had been intense, passionate, raw. But he had left for Canada suddenly, without explanation, without a goodbye. "Dayo," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're getting married today," he said, his gaze dropping to her white bridal robe. "Yes." She swallowed. "What are you doing here?" "I just got back to Lagos last night," he said. "I wasn't planning to stay long, but I had to see you." Her heart pounded. She had spent years hating him, cursing him in her prayers, wondering why he had left. And now, on her wedding day, fate had thrown him in her path. She took a step back. "I have to go." "Wait," he said, reaching for her wrist. She felt the warmth of his touch, and it sent shivers down her spine. "Lara, don't marry him," he said, his voice low and urgent. She yanked her hand away. "You don't get to tell me what to do, Dayo." "You did. Not after what?" His eyes darkened. "Lara. Tade is married." Chapter 4, The Betrayal. The words hit her like a thunderbolt. "Lies," she whispered, shaking her head. "Tade would never. He's married. To a woman in London. They have a child." Her breath caught. "How do you know this?" "Because she's my cousin." Lara's hands started shaking. No. It couldn't be. Tade had told her he was single, that he had never been married. She had been to his house, met his mother. There was no way he had another woman. Unless. Her mind raced back to the times Tade had traveled to London for business meetings. The times he had avoided conversations about starting a family immediately. The way he had never let her post him too much on social media. She staggered back, gripping a shelf for support. Dayo pulled out his phone and showed her a picture. There was Tade, smiling, arms wrapped around a woman holding a little girl who looked exactly like him. Tears welled in her eyes. No. 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 This wasn't happening. She thought about the hundreds of guests waiting for her at the wedding venue, the viral hashtags, the wedding pictures that would never be. She clenched her fists. Chapter 5. She had been played. Lara turned to Dayo, eyes burning with anger and pain. "What do I do now?" she whispered, her voice barely holding together. Dayo hesitated, then reached for her trembling hands. "You don't have to go through with it." But could she really walk away? The hall was filled with hundreds of guests, her family, her friends, the media. She had spent months planning this day. And yet, the thought of walking down the aisle to a man who had lied to her, who had a whole family in another country, made her stomach turn. Lara took a deep breath, wiped her tears, and straightened her shoulders. "I need to go back." Dayo's brows furrowed. "Back to the venue?" She nodded. "But not to get married." A small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "That's my girl." They hurried out of the supermarket. Lara got into a taxi, still in her robe, her mind spinning. As the car pulled up at the wedding venue, she could already see the chaos. Guests were seated, the bridal train was waiting, the MC was hyping up the crowd. She stepped out, feeling like the world was closing in on her. But before she could even make it to the entrance, her maid of honor, Kemi, ran up to her. "Where have you been?" Kemi whisper yelled, gripping Lara's arm. "The pastor is ready. Tate is waiting at the altar." Lara took a deep breath. "We're not getting married, Kemi." Kemi's eyes widened. "What?" "Tate is married," she said, her voice steady now. "To a woman in London. And they have a child." Kemi gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Are you sure?" Lara nodded. "I saw the pictures." A slow rage built in Kemi's eyes. "That bastard." Lara exhaled, feeling her decision settle into her bones. "I'm not going through with it." Kemi straightened. "So what's the plan?" Lara squared her shoulders. Chapter 6. We're making the wedding that never happened. The hall was silent as Lara stepped onto the stage. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, waiting. The MC, clearly confused, lowered his microphone. Tate, standing at the altar, frowned in confusion. "Lara? What's going on?" She met his gaze head-on, no longer afraid. "Tate, you told me I was the love of your life. You asked me to be your wife, to build a future with you. But what you didn't tell me was that you already built a family in London." Gasps filled the room. A murmur spread like wildfire. The whispers turned into chaos, phones flashing as people started recording. Tate's face paled. "Lara, whatever you think you know, it's not true." "Oh, it's very true." She turned to the crowd. "I have proof. Pictures of him with his wife and child." More gasps. A woman in the audience screamed. Tate stepped forward, desperation in his eyes. "Baby, let's talk about this privately." She shook her head. "No. You made a fool of me in public. You betrayed me in public. So I'm breaking this off in public." The crowd erupted. Some people clapped. Others cursed Tate under their breath. His groomsmen looked uncomfortable. His mother, sitting in the front row, buried her face in her hands. Lara turned to her guests, her voice strong. "There will be no wedding today. But there will be food and drinks. So please, eat, dance, and celebrate, because I just dodged the biggest mistake of my life." The room broke into loud cheers. Tate turned red with shame as he stormed out of the hall, his phone buzzing like crazy. Lara knew by tomorrow, the hashtag the wedding that never happened would be trending. But she didn't care. She was free. Chapter 7, New Beginnings. Later that evening, after the chaos died down and most guests had left, Lara sat outside the venue, barefoot, sipping champagne straight from the bottle. She heard a chuckle behind her. "You handled that like a queen," Dayo said, sitting beside her. She glanced at him. "I had no choice." He nodded. "You deserve better." She looked at him, really looked at him. "You disappeared, Dayo. You left without a word." His smile faded. "I know. And I hated myself for it." Why did you leave? He exhaled. My dad got arrested in Canada. It was messy. I had to go back to take care of my family. I didn't want to drag you into it. And by the time I could explain, too much time had passed. She stared at him for a long time, then sighed. You hurt me. I know. He reached for her hand. But I never stopped loving you, Lara. She felt something stir in her chest, an old, familiar warmth. But this time, she wasn't rushing. She smiled, taking another sip of champagne. Let's take it one day at a time. And for the first time in years, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The end.